November 27th, like a bajillion cards were revealed today, so let's just get into them. First up is Cataclysm, 4-mana epic warlock spell that destroys all minions at the price of discarding your hand. Let me just say, I absolutely love warlock's big board clears. I think it's a nice flavor for the class, so the fact that they can combine this board clear with discard, beautiful. For most board clears, usually a control class is a solid bet, but you really don't want to be emptying your hand of valuable cards in control, so mid-range quest block? I could see a mid-range quest deck with some discard synergies, but it's mainly just filled with draw to get Cataclysm. If you draw Cataclysm before turn 10, and as long as you maintain 6 cards in your hand, you'll be able to open up the portal pretty early with this card alone. This of course means you're still discarding your entire hand. I think this type of mid-range deck would be really interesting. You're working towards drawing Cataclysm, and then you discard your hand, which is something that will change up your gameplay every time, and now I might actually have a use for my Zavas. Still, relying on drawing one of the 2 out of 30 Cataclysms may just be too inconsistent or just plain annoying. Maybe Hemet is an option? Also, Yaw casting this spell is hilarious. It looks like a really cool card. It's so powerful it might make a discard warlock tier 4 or 5, but it's still too inconsistent to see a lot of play. I kind of wish Cataclysm wasn't an epic though, because I don't know if I would recommend crafting it for 400 dust. Next up is Call to Arms, 4-mana epic paladin spell that recruits 3 minions that cost 2 or less. Goodbye small time recruit, except no one played that card. If you ever actually played small time recruits, you'll know that drawing the 1-drops is nice, but the biggest gain of the card is thinning out your deck by removing the 1-drops. I see Call to Arms as doing the same thing, but instead of being a slow 3-mana draw, 4 mana will get you some stats on the board. Some minions are going to be nice on board, but also a lot of the 2-mana paladin minions are going to lose their battlecry value if recruited. Again, the card is mainly to improve future draws, and only getting the 2/2 Hydrologist isn't that bad. There's a lot of fun 2-drops with this card for the same reason as yesterday's Hungry Eden, but this time you control what minions you put in your deck to recruit, and they're on your side of the board. Still, decks don't run a lot of 1 and 2 drops, maybe 10 in an aggro deck. The main problem is having these 1 and 2 cost minions in your deck. So on curve this card is probably great, but if you're searching for 1 and 2 drops in your opening hand, and you're drawing cards every turn, then if you play this card in the late game, it's probably not going to get you a lot of value. I think in an aggro deck you might be able to fit 2 Call to Arms, only really hoping that you just draw 1 in the early game. And in tempo you might be able to squeeze one of these in just to help with getting better late draws while still getting value out on the board. We'll have to see if the 4 mana is still too slow of a play, and if there are enough 1 and 2 drops in decks to get the value off of this card. But the combo potential is definitely a fun aspect, even if it doesn't see competitive play. Next up, I'll go one by one, but there's a little set of 3 Shaman cards that all synergize around Shaman Hero Power totems. There's Kobold Hermit, 2-mana 1/1 common with Battlecry, choose a basic totem, summon it. So this means from the 4 basic totems you can get, you'll be able to discover and pick the one you want. I always liked the Justicar upgrade version of the Shaman Hero Power where you could pick the totem, and Kobold's Hermit lets you do just that. Now the problem is 2-mana 1/1 is terrible. There's the flexibility of picking the best totem for the situation, but really only spell power and heal might break even in value. Still, whenever you add 2 bodies onto the board, it's always good for Bloodlust, but then again, it's going to be hard for the low stats to survive. In addition, if you play this card before hero powering, the totem you select prevents the hero power from getting that totem, because the hero power only lets you summon 1 of each totem onto the board. It's a small thing, but something to consider. Simply said, it's a terrible card on its own, but to complement that is Primal Talismans, 3-mana rare spell that reads, give your minions death rattle, summon a random basic totem. So it's like Druid Soul of the Forest, except worse stats. As I mentioned about the other totem card, your hero power doesn't let you summon more of 1 each totem, but for this card it's just a 1 in 4 chance of getting each totem when the death rattle goes off. So that means you could potentially have a board of 7 spell power totems. Someone can do the math on that, but it's pretty unlikely. Again, it's an absolutely terrible card alone, but maybe combining it with board fills like Call on the Finishers allows you to possibly get big boards of totems, which is something that's never really been possible before. I understand basic totems aren't that good, and I know this card isn't good, but before you give up, let's just check out that last totem card. Windshear Stormcaller, epic 5-mana 5/5 with Battlecry. If you control all 4 basic totems, summon Alakir the Windlord. Whoa, I did not expect that from a totem card. I mean, it's a pretty simple card. If you have all 4 basic totems, you get a 5/5 and a 3/5 with Wind Fury, Charge, Divine Shield, and Taunt, all of this only for 5 mana. But how often do you get all 4 totems in a game in the current meta? Very infrequently, maybe every once in a while against an aggro deck that isn't trading, but Wind Shear is not going to be a card for any deck really besides totem decks, and that kind of sucks for an epic. So where does that leave us? Is it another situation like Freeze Shaman where a completely random archetype is thrown in to fill up cards? Well, I think there is a bit of card filler in here, but unlike Freeze Shaman, totems have always been around shamans. There's strong totems like Flame Tongue and Mana Tide, but like these totems are designed, right now they're just as buffs for the other cards you have. It's going to be interesting to see if these totem cards, the later two being pretty decent for totem synergy, can help make the deck playable. I'm not expecting a deck to climb the ladder, but I want to see a working concept behind a totem deck, where all the minions you play aren't necessarily just stats running into each other, but synergies and buffs that allow the player to get extra value out of their cards. And maybe you'll just Bloodlust to win too. Next is, whoa, another 3-card set that kind of goes together, but this time it's for Warlock. Lesser Amethyst Spellstone is 4 mana, has lifesteal, and deals 3 damage to a minion. Your hero has to take damage from your own cards to upgrade it to 5 damage and then again to 7. It's pretty easy to hurt yourself in Warlock. Now your hero power doesn't count because the upgrade requires a card to inflict the damage, but in almost every deck, aggro, tempo, control, handlock, destructive, every Warlock has cards that deal damage to themselves because that's how a Warlock do. For this reason, I think it's going to be relatively easy to upgrade this card if you just put a few cards in there with upgrading in mind. And unlike the other lesser spellstones, just the first upgrade of this card, 4 mana deal 5 heal 5 is pretty decent. 7 is obviously better, but in a pinch, the 5 damage can destroy a lot of minions and heal yourself up for a bit. I think it's a pretty well designed card, synergizes with the unique self-harming aspect of Warlock, and it also provides the heal for their emo troubles. I sort of wish it went to 10 damage as the last upgrade because then it could really ensure that you could get rid of a big threat and heal for a lot, but maybe Blizzard knows what they're doing. The card would work in aggro, but the damage has to go to a minion, so that's a good design choice. But most likely it means this card would probably work in a tempo and maybe control deck. It's really on the line whether or not 7 damage and 7 heal would be worth a card slot in control. I think because you'll likely be able to upgrade this card pretty often, it might be used like Siphon Soul. It's less convenient, but in a non-duplicate deck, it could be a viable piece of removal and heal. But what if you want more self-harming activators, you say? Well, how about Kobold Librarian and Vulgar Homunculus? 1 mana 2/1 common with the Battlecry, draw a card, deal 2 damage to your hero, and 2 mana 2/2 common demon with Taunt and Battlecry, deal 2 damage to your hero. So I could see Kobold Librarian working in Zoolock. If you don't have Flame Imp on turn 1, this card is okay. It draws you a card, and Zoolock doesn't really care about damage to their face, but the 2/1 stat line is still pretty weak. If it doesn't die on your opponent's turn and you get 2 damage off, it's great value, but I don't know if it's going to survive turn 1, and definitely not more than 2. 1 health minions just don't last. If anything, it's just a 1 mana hero power, and that might end up working for Zoolock. So then is a 2 mana 2/4 with Taunt worth the 2 damage? Well, I actually think it is. It's not necessarily for Zoolock, but 2 mana 2/4 is great for anti-aggro. It trades nicely into almost all small minions and can take 2 or more hits. While dealing 2 damage to your face doesn't really seem good against aggro, and it definitely isn't, but if you think about it, turn 2 in a game, you likely haven't tapped, and hopefully your hero is still at full health. Well, with the lifesteal Warlock has, maybe the 2 damage from Vulgar can be healed up again. Would you rather use lifesteal when you're at full health or your hero needs healing? Well, it doesn't really matter, right? As long as you have full health by the end, but what if you heal your hero and you also get +2 stats and Taunt on a minion you played earlier? That's why lifesteal can possibly work with this card. But do these cards help Lesser Amethyst upgrade? I guess. I'm a little bit on the fence about Kobold's Librarian. I could see Vulgar Homunculus working to combat some aggro decks, but either way, I think there's enough self-inflicted damage done in Warlock right now that Lesser Amethyst Spellstone will be able to find its way into a deck that wants a removal and heal. Last up is Linessa Sunsar, Legendary Paladin, 7 mana 1/1, wait for it, Battlecry, cast each spell you've cast on your minions this game on this one. Did someone say Quest Paladin? I did not even know Blizzard had the technology to make such a card, but the idea of accumulating all of your minions' buffs into one minion is fantastic. One question I have about how the card interacts, does it cast the spells in order? Because you could have really solid spells like Spike Ridge Steed and Blessing of Kings, but what if I first cast those 2 spells on my minions, and then the 3rd spell I cast is Dark Conviction? When I play Linessa, does my 7/11 become a 3 Tier 3 by the end. And Adapt. It's a discovery buff, so does Linessa get the same adaptation? Do you choose, or is it a random one? I have not found the answers to these questions, but honestly, most of these interactions won't greatly influence the power level of this card. It's still a bad card against silenced and single target removals, and one card isn't going to change the tier of a Quest Paladin deck. It's going to be a fun addition, it's going to make the deck better, but it's still not going to be competitive. The question is, can you fit this card into mid-range Paladin? The deck typically runs 2 Blessing of Kings and 2 Spike Ridge Steeds, basically just the 2 best buffing cards. The way I see it, mid-range has to sway according to the meta, faster with more aggro or slower with more control. Don't get me wrong, if a mid-range deck is strong enough, it can do whatever it wants in terms of tempo, but I don't think mid-range Paladin has really gotten too much better from the cards released so far. Granted, not many cards have been released, but I also think the meta is going to speed up a bit, and I think mid-range Paladin is going to have to try to speed up a bit too. The direction of the deck is mainly based on the power level of the cards to be released, but I just don't think a high-costed minion like Linessa is going to see play in the mid-range deck, and I don't think Control Paladin is going to be able to hold on to their tier 4 spot, so in the end, I don't think Linessa is going to see much play. That's all for today's cards. There's a playlist if you want to check out some of the other cards if you missed them, and if you want to hear my opinion as more cards come out, feel free to subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with some more cards, and until then, ta-ta.